Ahora llegamos a un espacio súper especial. ¿Por qué? Porque aquí empiezan los conferencistas internacionales. Esto quiere decir que le damos la bienvenida al inglés, al bilingüismo, y ustedes ya saben que empezó que estamos muy conectados con el tema del trilingüismo, inglés, español, y también a aprender a programar, un lenguaje de programación. Entonces, ahora sí, vamos a hacer un pequeño cambio. Ya vamos a promover el tema del inglés. Así que, if you want to know how the software industry plays a relevant role in economic activation, you are in the right place. From FedeSoft, ProColombia, and the mayor's office of Medellin, we want the world to know the world-class solutions of all Colombian companies. It's an honor for me to have a pleasure of introducing the CEO and co-founder of 10X Innovation Lab to Softic, the most important business matchmaking forum in the Colombian software industry, where we develop Colombian software for the world. That is why we know that the key is Colombian software. Thank you, Klaus and Aaron, for accepting our invitation. Welcome to Softic 2020. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Liz. We're very delighted to be here on this call today, webinar. And today you're actually going to be having a truly work from home presentation from me, because you can actually see my kids' toys in the background. So Aaron and I were based in Silicon Valley. I'm in San Francisco. He is in the East Bay. And obviously during these times, we had to work in slightly different environments. So that's the reality that we're in today. But we look forward to presenting you our work and some of our thoughts on Silicon Valley and the ecosystem. Let me share my screen here. Let me see if I can choose. There we go. Aaron, do you see my screen?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay. So again, first and foremost, thanks to ProColombia, FedeSoft, and all its partners to invite us to do this presentation today. I'm here with my co-founder, Aaron McDaniel, who is the head of entrepreneurship at 10X Innovation Lab. And we have had the pleasure of actually working with a lot of institutions and organizations in Colombia in the past. In fact, we work with Diana, who is a part of the FedeSoft team now, and also Tatiana. Actually worked with them over the past 4 years and had the pleasure of working with a lot of corporate executives that comes to Silicon Valley to get insights on industry trends and how companies here are operating. Many executives, entrepreneurs, and investors are coming to Silicon Valley to seek inspiration, to get in contact with strategic partners, to drive innovation, not only in Silicon Valley, but in their respective ecosystems. So Aaron and I have had a pleasure of really working with countries from all over the world. So today's agenda is about why Silicon Valley is a resilient ecosystem, to give you some insights on what's moving, but also how it's constructed. Then we're going to be sharing a bit about how COVID-19 has changed the game, and then following afterwards more on expanding in the area of COVID-19. And so that is really a lot of the work that we've done in the past in helping international businesses scale and grow internationally. Now, before starting the presentation on the topic, I just want to give you a bit of context as to why you should listen to us, basically, if you will. We have been in Silicon Valley for a long time. And really at its core, what we do is two things, although there's listed three here. We help corporates operate like startups in terms of we provide them the tools and education and understanding how to do that. Two, we basically help entrepreneurs grow and scale globally with all the acceleration programs that we've done in partnership with governments from all over the world. To give you a sense of the impact that we've had, the founding team, is that we work with more than 50 countries. We have helped 1,500 founders, and we have also helped more than 2,500 executives, as well as also done some education in one of the areas that we're really passionate about as well is essentially motivate and inspire students to go out and create, whether it's within an existing business, a corporate setting, if you will, or it's going out to create new business opportunities and become an entrepreneur. That's really the stuff that we're passionate about, and really helping people unleash their potential and make them successful in whatever setting that they're in. Now, today is an unprecedented time, if you will. Again, I'm standing here in my living room. Usually I'm out at conferences, networking and presenting and all that stuff, including Aaron as well. But we have had to adjust, obviously, with COVID-19 to this entirely new setting. It's unfortunate, but we're all resilient and we're all adapting to this new change, and in partnership, hopefully, we'll overcome this situation very soon. So as families are trying to balance work and life, not really the work-life balance we had envisioned, we're really trying to find ways to become as efficient as possible in our day-to-day lives. Organizations are trying to restructure themselves into this new digital format and digital work that we're in enabling their employees to also be as productive and as efficient as possible, and also providing that sense of, unity and culture that we're used to when we go into a workspace. And industries obviously have to entirely adapt into a new, set of rules, if you will, where, obviously there's been a lot of regulation and restrictions on how to actually conduct business, operate business, etc. So we're in this very, very new situation where we're all learning together, as we go, basically. So it's a very interesting time, but at the same time, I think we're all learning in the process. And I think when we come out on the other side, a lot of things have, we've learned about ourselves, but we also have been able to optimize a lot of the stuff that we've done. So even though COVID-19 is disrupting many economies, local, national, if you will, Silicon Valley still as an ecosystem continues to march on. Still as a city and as a location, as an area, Silicon Valley still seems to be very robust as an economy, because we really have a very diverse portfolio of industries, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's pharmaceutical, retail, banking, whatever. Silicon Valley has been able to really create this very diverse ecosystem in terms of industries. Moreover, remote work was not really uncommon here in Silicon Valley. In fact, remote work has been something that's been discussed for the past 10 years, if you will. And so a lot of the tools that we're now using on a day-to-day, we've actually used for a long time. And in fact, a lot of the companies that are here in the Bay Area that has launched and built these platforms are benefiting now in growth, basically. And so Silicon Valley is a very innovation-driven ecosystem that really thrives, in times where there are specific challenges that can be addressed. And so the way that a lot of founders and entrepreneurs are, looking at this situation is also they're seeing that as an opportunity, if you will. So very much ingrained in the culture and trying to solve problems. And in fact, we're experiencing many of these days, quite frankly. And moreover, one of the reasons why Silicon Valley is very, very good in terms of also adapting to this new change is also the trust in data, if you will. And so Silicon Valley and San Francisco was the first city, I believe, actually starting to do, essentially putting all these restrictions in terms of not going outside, mask wearing, and all that stuff. So we were very early in really moving forward with these decisions because we saw the data coming in with COVID-19. So that has really prevented us from having a lot of, deaths and all that terrible stuff, because a lot of the people in the Bay Area has really trusted that data. So we're very early adopters, and we trust data, we trust information, and so we move fast and act fast on those things. To kind of show you the speed and agility that we see in Silicon Valley just very quickly here is that Airbnb is in a very, very, obviously in an industry that's kind of seems to be completely disrupted these days with, no travel going on internationally and so forth. But even though obviously Airbnb had to respond to all these changes in terms of cutting their workforce with 25%, slashing all their marketing budget and everything. They have still been able to pivot and change their model, if you will. And one of the reasons being is that they're very, technology driven as a business. And so they've been able to reposition and retarget the company from international travel to local travel, changing their marketing channels and all that stuff. So even though travel tourism is, fairly disrupted these days, still Airbnb has been able to pivot and move forward as a business and not really, being a dead unicorn, if you will, but actually now filing for IPO in August. So it's a very, very interesting case on how, one, the speed of the ecosystem, but also the agility of businesses here in Silicon Valley are essentially. And so going back to the whole work from home and platforms that's being developed to enable this, is that Silicon Valley, and over the past many years, has actually developed tools that allows us to do so, right? Zoom, DocuSign, and Slacks are all tools and platforms that are being developed here in Silicon Valley and the Bay Area. And we're now seeing these companies obviously growing immensely and adopting new users, adopting new customers, enterprise customers, if you will. And so we're really seeing also Silicon Valley being able to grow in certain areas of the ecosystem despite there being an economic crisis. Because obviously a lot of these traditional businesses, large enterprises, now have to adopt these new platforms so they can start to do remote work as well. And so I see actually Silicon Valley be, stitching together, kind of a company's ability to be able to really fully function during these times, which are unfortunate, of course. So Silicon Valley has been poised for change. We're moving on, in benefiting from these trends, even though obviously it's not something we should celebrate necessarily. So why is Silicon Valley so resilient? Well, there's like 6 primary factors, if you will, and actually 7 at a high level. But one, we have a very strong workforce. We are able to attract a lot of talent, both from these companies, pulling in talent from all over the world, but also top tier universities like Stanford and Berkeley. So over many years, we've been able to attract a lot of people to Silicon Valley, diverse from different backgrounds, countries, everything, and basically residing here in Silicon Valley. So that's one of the primary success factors, I believe, because with innovation, it requires a very diverse, way of thinking, and the fact that we have people from all over the world can contribute to innovation. Another thing, obviously, is our long track record of investors being here in Silicon Valley. We have the top tier investment firms, if you compare them to others around the world, Andreessen Horowitz, Kleiner Perkins, and others, that are continuously investing into the ecosystem and into startups. I'll show that a bit later as well in terms of the amount of investments that's happening here. Another thing is corporate support and corporate engagement when it comes to the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So a lot of big companies are really involving themselves into the entrepreneurship ecosystem by one, education, also investments, collaboration, willing to pilot companies, and all that stuff. So we're seeing that very, that really interested in engaging with the entrepreneurial ecosystem, alongside also international corporates setting up, innovation centers, corporate venture capital funds in Silicon Valley. So they're coming in also with their own capital and their own interest in collaboration. Then accelerators, obviously a long track record of that. Accelerators that are educating entrepreneurs, that are helping them grow and scale. Where companies like Y Combinator, 500 startups, and also including us, are able to really teach entrepreneurs on how to operate as efficiently as possible with limited capital, so they can grow and scale down the road. Service providers that are having different models in terms of how to interact with entrepreneurs, free services, don't charge upfront, bit of an equity share as well. The different models basically the service providers are seeking. So they're more startup friendly, if you will, compared to other markets where obviously fees are higher, and there's not that same, level of understanding that an entrepreneur fundamentally do not have the same capital as a mature business. So these are some of the reasons why Silicon Valley is so resilient, because we have all these actors in Silicon Valley that are playing a key role in supporting the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So just to give you an overview is that, Silicon Valley is from San Francisco to San Jose. I believe it's around 50 miles, and we have massive companies in Silicon Valley that are really contributing to this growth, right? So approximately more than 30,000 startups in Silicon Valley. Auburn, obviously, this will increase because of COVID-19, because a lot of them can't really gain that traction, and they operate with limited run rate and a limited amount of revenue, and also investment capital. So we will probably see this be decreasing, unfortunately, more, and also with depending on how long this COVID-19 and the pandemic will last. We have tremendous amount of investors in Silicon Valley, close to 20,000. And obviously this will also be impacted, but it just goes to show the level of activity that is in Silicon Valley. So Silicon Valley originally was around Mountain View, Palo Alto area, which is in the middle here, but it has spread out north and south, and even also east where Tesla is. But one trend that we have seen in the past is going up towards San Francisco, where more the consumer-friendly companies has been, Uber, Lyft, Twitter, and all that stuff. So a lot of activity. And so from an investment standpoint, you can really see, the incredible amount of capital that's being injected into the ecosystem here in the Bay Area. We have large investments up until $1 billion in Flexport. That's a freight forward company. We have autonomous vehicle companies that are attracting a lot of capital, Neuro and Aurora. We have, consumer-friendly companies called Yule and DoorDash also attracting a tremendous amount of capital. Now, whether these are good investments, time will tell. Oftentimes, we also see, a lot of capital being injected into a bad investment, such as WeWork and others. So, we will see down the road whether or not these will turn into be great investments for the investors, obviously, and only time can tell that. But in total, venture capital investments are around $49.9 billion in Silicon Valley alone, and that constitutes of around 44% of venture capital in the entire US. So as you can see, it's Silicon Valley that's attracting a lot of the attention because of the level of innovation, the culture here of creating new businesses. It's attracting a lot of interest, not just in the US, but also from international investors. And so Silicon Valley is fundamentally founded in diversity. It's continuously attracted people from all over the world, and all basically from Africa to Europe to Asia to wherever, essentially attracting people that are driven by the sort of the passion for change and coming over here to essentially creating their own career and also creating their own businesses, right? So I kind of see people traveling to Silicon Valley that want to stay here being naturally entrepreneurial, if you will. If you pull up your life back in, I'm from Denmark, or in Colombia, and you set a base in San Francisco, I almost consider you to be entrepreneurial from the get-go, because you're essentially giving away a safe life, what you have back in your home market, and try to build up your career and life here in Silicon Valley. So I think from that standpoint, I think it's natural to people to try new things. And so it's very much ingrained in the culture. So 40% of the population is foreign born, and around net immigration from 2019 is around 20,000 people. So a lot of people coming in. So if you then take, the very large tech companies in terms of their ability to create revenue, right? Now, disclosure, Amazon and Microsoft is originally from Seattle, but they have such a large operation in Silicon Valley that they're still very much is here from a presence standpoint. But market capitalization, $6.56 trillion US dollars, and total revenue is $897.95 trillion US dollars. So there's just a lot of revenue coming in. Now, even executives all over the world are really looking at Silicon Valley as a threat, if you will. And so executives from all kinds of industries are looking at Silicon Valley and trying to figure out what is the next big thing. A perfect example is a quote from Jamie Dimon, who is basically the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, one of the most influential financial services executives. So he said, when I go to Silicon Valley, they all want to eat our lunch. Every single one of them is going to try. And that kind of speaks to the culture of the Bay Area and Silicon Valley. If you haven't been here, you're going to quickly experience that, because at every corner shop and every cafe, there's going to be somebody talking about building a business or building a startup. And so very much focused on disruption, very much focused on finding new growth areas and growth opportunities. Now, competition will not necessarily come from where you expect. I want to point that out as well. Typically, banks look at their competitor over on the right and say, okay, hey, what are they doing? But the reality is that technology is driving a lot of change. It also pulls in basically other competitors into the mix, as many businesses and most businesses will be primarily technology driven. And so just taking Amazon as an example, if you see all the logos on many of them here, you basically see a lot of the areas that Amazon has moved into. So you see from healthcare and pharmaceuticals, Fire TV in terms of telecoms, obviously web services and cloud services. We have also consumer goods and Amazon Basics. We really have a lot of different areas. And from a financial services standpoint, we have Amazon Pay. So Amazon is continuously moving into new avenues to grow their business. And it can, because they have such a massive distribution now, whether it's digital distribution or whether it's physical distribution. So on the digital side, obviously, they have access to a lot of consumers and are able to really move into new avenues very, very fast as they launch new services. And on the distribution side, in terms of physical products, obviously, fulfillments, they build up this whole e-commerce model, so they can really move products very, very fast. And so clearly, Amazon can just quickly move into avenues where they can quickly grow a customer base in that specific domain, which makes it very, very interesting to see where Amazon will be successful and where they will be not successful. From a COVID-19 standpoint, one can only predict that Amazon will have a massive influential role when it comes to distributing a vaccine, for example, healthcare products, and so forth. And so because they really have this locked down in terms of delivery on time within a short time frame, so one can only predict that they will maybe also have a very, very influential role in being able to help the population get access to vaccine once it's ready and prepared for, and so forth. So I'm sure Amazon is going to move into other areas as well. If you take real estate, for example, they're building affordable housing up in Seattle. So they're committing to that as well, because there's a massive, issue with rise in real estate. And so they're also coming in philanthropically, if you will, to help, build, affordable housing. So they have this very big economic muscle where they can just go in and do stuff in a much quicker way than any other business can. So it just shows their muscle and their ability to move extremely, extremely fast. Now, I just want to share a couple of post-pandemic predictions before I will hand it over to Aaron, who's going to be sharing a bit more on our work in Silicon Valley and what we do in terms of helping companies to grow and expand and scale into new markets. And so there will be an impact, and we are seeing an impact here in Silicon Valley, obviously, despite the economy being very resilient. Now, Silicon Valley obviously still will continue to retract. So there are certain areas that are hit more than others, obviously the more traditional sectors. But then we see new growth opportunities, as I explained, with work from home tools, Zoom, Slack, and others. These companies will still attract a lot of interest from customers moving forward. And so we're going to be seeing, obviously, new areas continues to develop. You're also seeing a lot of biotech companies developing vaccines and everything. So there's a lot of stuff happening here in Silicon Valley, and there's always an area that companies can move into, even with a pandemic in mind and an economic crisis in mind. One of the predictions that I have is that the longer the pandemic, obviously, the greater the loss of talent. One thing is loss of talent that's already here, but also the future talent that we could acquire from all over the world. When it comes to talent here, is that we have a lot of executives from like European countries and other established economies that, now we're seeing some of those moving back to their home country because unfortunately we still have a political situation in the US that is not really benefiting a lot of people that sort of have more of a safer environment at home, if you will. They're actually looking to move back. So I'm from Denmark, so I see a lot of my Danish friends that are working at top tier tech companies. They're moving back home, working from Denmark, and very likely also staying home because they simply see Denmark as being a more stable economy, in terms of going to school, healthcare is free, and all those benefits that we maybe didn't appreciate beforehand, but are now starting to appreciate, obviously, of countries like Denmark and other economies in Europe and other areas and other regions. Another thing is obviously schools are close to a great extent. A lot of it is distant learning. So we're also losing out on talent, if you will, talent that are coming into the Bay Area. And we haven't seen obviously the same influx of people now because of that. So what we're seeing right now in San Francisco is that San Francisco, as a small economy in the whole Silicon Valley, is now a lot of availabilities in terms of housing. We're seeing housing prices drop, real estate, both in rental and also buying. And so we're seeing the impact on that front where people, one, don't want to live in the city, two, don't want to travel into the city. And so we're going to be seeing a change there as well. So companies will move from San Francisco to other suburbs to attract talent is one of the trends that I'm foreseeing, as well as also companies will move from San Francisco to other cities and countries to attract talent. So this is where Colombia, obviously, with the tremendous talent pool that they have there, can have an opportunity to attract companies to the region. And I think Medellin as a city is very well positioned to do that because it's, by and large, a very international city compared to other cities in Colombia, if you will. So I see that there's a great opportunity there. And so, but still, even though these challenges are happening, and still even these changes are occurring, San Francisco and the Bay Area as a whole, I believe, still will bounce back following the pandemic. And one of the most important things is Stanford and Berkeley will still continue to attract talent because I don't believe the traditional education model will break. I think that will still continue. And so I think there's still going to be an interest to come in and be educated in these top tier universities that will then funnel people into the ecosystem and continue to provide talent that are looking at things with a new lens and create new innovation. And so my prediction is that distant learning is great, but it would not replace the old traditional model. I sincerely don't believe that that will be the case. Another thing is that distributed living will be there to a certain extent, but I also think that people will come back to the office at some point and work there because for innovation to happen, you also need more of these not scheduled meetings, more on the day-to-day interaction with people around you that allows you to kind of share challenges, share experiences, compare notes, learn from each other, grow and innovate. And so I don't think the office space is dead necessarily. I think the office space will continue just in a different format post COVID-19. So Silicon Valley had already launched different initiatives where they allow for work from home, on certain days, a bit more flexible work and all that stuff. And I think that part will continue to persist, but not fully remote in the future. Some will go there, but I don't think most companies will do. One company that will go fully remote is Twitter, but the others will still provide this very unique work environment and culture for companies and people to thrive. With that, I'm going to leave it over to Aaron. I spoke, I think, pretty much on time, so I'm going to be having Aaron sharing his presentation, and then I look forward to a continued dialogue and collaboration with Colombia, and hope to build more partnerships in the future, and maybe have my first time to Colombia, Medellin in the future. Still haven't been there, but I would love to go. So if anybody want to invite me, I'm happy to go. Thank you so much. Cheers. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Klaus. Can you hear me and see my screen? Klaus?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Wonderful. All right. Well, just wanted to build a little bit off of what Klaus was talking about and talk about some of the things that are happening today in the age of COVID. So let's jump right in. So, a number of things COVID has changed, but in particular, it's accelerated a number of societal shifts. It's also exposed a lot of gaps in current innovations, things that maybe weren't accelerating as fast as other industries. But really, the core of it is it's created a lot of opportunities and growth areas. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of those changes that have happened beyond just the Silicon Valley, really at a global level. And then talk about so what? What do we do because of that? What opportunities does it create? And how do you go about taking advantage of those opportunities to help grow your business? So first, as Klaus was talking about, there were changes that have happened in the Silicon Valley. One of them is coming to grips with where innovation was focused versus where it should be focused. So Mark Andreessen, general partner of Andreessen Horowitz, also founder of Netscape, he famously had said in 2011 that software is eating the world, and that really the huge focus around innovation is around software and disrupting industries. But today, in the face of the pandemic, he has said, we chose not to have the mechanisms, the factories, the systems to make these things. We chose not to build. Because of that focus strictly on software, there were a lot of gaps. And we've seen that just in distribution and a lot of other areas with coming to grips with managing this pandemic. And so it's really created this opportunity to reevaluate what innovation is and how it goes beyond just software, but really permeates to other parts of the organization. And not to go off on too much of a tangent, but just to share a couple things as it relates to how we at 10X think. One, we believe that it's better for you to challenge your own business model first instead of letting someone else come and disrupt it for you. And one of the classic examples we like to use with the sessions we do is around the transportation industry and taxi service, in particular, in really the initial stages of where we saw impact, which was in the San Francisco Bay Area, where taxi companies, once Uber and Lyft started to get some traction, within a 1-year period, these taxi companies lost 65% of their revenue. Not 65% of their profit, but 65% of their revenue in 1 year, because they were not ready to innovate and see this disruption coming from the outside. They were too stuck in their existing way of doing things. So we believe it's better that you challenge your own model. Secondly, we believe that a lot of this innovation principles and mindset doesn't apply just to your product or service, but really applies to your whole company culture and all of the processes within your company. So when we talk about innovation, there's things you can do to improve your product or service, but there's so much you can do to improve the operations of your company as well. So as I mentioned, just to go through each of those examples, accelerating societal shifts. So we've seen major transformations take place. And as Klaus talked about, the key question is what is going to be changed forever and what is going to go back, at least in part, to the way it was before once this pandemic is done. We've seen workplace transformation, a lot of tools. Two of the tools here on the slide were what Klaus had mentioned earlier, Zoom and video conferencing, as well as Slack and on-demand communication within teams and within virtual offices have really changed things. These percentages on the screen are the stock growth, the growth in the companies just year to date, or just actually since the beginning of the pandemic, and how a number of companies have benefited because they have been a step ahead on a lot of these transitions. So online adoption of shopping, online shopping adoption has grown exponentially fast as people are too scared to go into stores, as stores are having to figure out how to deal with local government regulation around distancing. And so companies like Amazon have benefited a great deal because they've already built out things online. And the question will become, do people realize the convenience of doing online shopping? And are they willing to shift more of their shopping behavior to online? And then there's been a big move toward on-demand consumption. Instead of, we saw this slowly as Netflix has grown, but really Netflix has grown exponentially since the pandemic, just because of people, wanting to be able to access things on their own schedule. People are working from home, handling the pandemic in different ways. And so this on-demand has become more and more important. It's also exposed a lot of vulnerabilities. Now, a lot of this would be in the context of the United States. Each country has its own different different struggles that they have, but to a certain extent, it really has caused some strain on these systems across everywhere. And so healthcare has been a big place as well. How do you get out testing so that millions of people can be tested? And so that there's acceleration in vaccination development, which, in some countries, 4 or 5 years is considered fast. How do we make that much, much faster? Klaus was talking a bit about education and how that has changed. So as a member of the faculty of UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business, where I teach entrepreneurship and innovation, we've had to deal with distance learning and being able to engage completely virtually a classroom of students. And the same thing happens where you're having to go from a physical office to a virtual office. And how do you create some of those moments where people would see each other and be able to collaborate? How do you do that virtually? And there weren't a lot of tools that had been adopted in a big way to allow to do that. So how do we adopt those tools? How do we adapt some of those tools in order to better help make more of a virtual experience match what happens in a physical office environment? And then finally, distribution. Just in the short term, when the pandemic hit, things like toilet paper and hand sanitizers, distributing that, was a big challenge. Obviously it's died down a little bit. Everyone's decided they have enough toilet paper in their closet to be able to last them as much as they need. But that has really shown some strain on physical distribution of products, especially as retail locations are closing down, at least temporarily. How do you distribute things to get them to your end customer? But a lot of new opportunities have been created. So as I said, the question being, what will go back to normal and what will be changed forever, or really in most cases, somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. And so things like manufacturing, because in-person labor has some struggles in the context of a pandemic and social distancing, how is that going to move to adoption of automation? And what, and really what has been happening in a lot of countries for the last few decades is moving manufacturing and other certain skilled laborers off local markets, going internationally. Well, if automation can allow for an even cheaper cost than foreign labor, which you have to struggle with everything related to the pandemic and distancing, would it be easier to move to automation? What processes could be automated? And then what does the office space look like? Remote work, distributed living, as Klaus had mentioned, because Silicon Valley is the epicenter of a lot of innovation, you see certain hints for what might happen on a more widespread basis earlier on in the Silicon Valley. So a lot of people moving toward distributed living. If I don't have to come to an office each day, why do I need to live in a major area where the cost of living is so much higher and there's congestion and traffic and all sorts of other undesirable things? And then what does that remote environment look like? Looking at real estate listings in the Bay Area, you see people listing Zoom rooms as special smaller rooms in houses oversized closets, but finding a way to rebrand those and repurpose some of people's existing space. So the question is, okay, well, all of this is happening, but what do we do? The so what of the questions proposed. Well, how do we take advantage of these opportunities? How do we cover for some of these vulnerabilities that we have? And we think at 10X, this is a very ripe opportunity for companies to expand beyond their home markets. And part of the reason is, if everybody is going virtual right now, it's a lot easier to create virtual distributed work environments where you have employees in other countries, and where instead of having to physically connect face to face with a lot of customers in new markets, because everybody's connecting virtually, it creates this opening of boundaries that go beyond just the borders of your existing markets. And so there are 3 steps to the process that we at 10X in our model have developed. First is to prepare. So this involves evaluating potential markets, recalibrating your model, because we often find in working with companies that exactly how you operate, everything from your revenue model and pricing to just your operating models and channels of distribution, may differ when you go to a new international market. So this prepare step is where you recalibrate and you prepare your organization, get buy-in, and evaluate where to expand to and what different markets. Step 2 is the ignite step. And this is where you can validate the market through testing, through stakeholder building in this new market you're wanting to enter. And then finally, 3 is the expand step. And this is where you really take what you've learned. You may have to pivot and change a bit here and there as you do this, but then it's about scaling in this new market. So let's talk in more detail about each of these 3 steps. So first, as we talked about, everything has changed to a certain extent because of all these challenges we have. And so this creates a very interesting opportunity where, what we have seen just within our own business, as well as a lot of other clients we work with, people to a certain extent that might have been harder to get in touch with previously are now easier to get in touch with because they're home more. They're not spending as much time commuting or sitting in meetings. And so being able to access them, because there's a lot more what we'll label as work-life integration, where you're not just separate at the office. I'm working, then I come home and I'm at home with my family. Your home is your office and your office is your home. And so there's much more integration. So people are working longer hours, people are working different hours, people are managing the responsibilities they have with families. In the United States, a lot of schools have closed for in-person classes, and so having to manage your kids with distance learning as an example. So obviously things have changed. Now the question is, where do you go? Well, you go through an evaluation process to determine the size of the market, a lot of different factors around regulation. We could list a number of 20, 30 different things, but that normal business evaluation, business case building that you would go through is the next step. And then as you build out the message with things, then it's about also getting buy-in from your superiors, from your colleagues, from your board, whatever it might be for you in your situation, but getting all of the stakeholders on the same page around expanding. Then it's also really just understanding some of the big cultural differences that you have when you're going into this new market, because it changes how the sales process may work. It changes how business is done. So just as an example, in the Silicon Valley, when we are coaching companies who want to expand to the United States in the Silicon Valley, we have to share with them a number of differences compared to a lot of home markets. So as an example, in some markets, reaching out to someone you don't know and have no connection with is kind of weird and is maybe not generally as accepted and frowned upon. Where in the Silicon Valley, it's natural for you to reach out to someone you don't know. That doesn't mean everybody's going to reply to you, but people are much more open to connecting with people they don't know and potentially being able to do business together. Along those same lines, I think we all agree that a warm introduction between a mutual connection is always better. And that is very openly done in the Silicon Valley. People very regularly are reaching out to us to ask to be connected with people in our network and vice versa. And it creates this interconnectivity and allows for much more of this collaboration and innovation to occur. The follow-up culture is also different. Whereas in some cultures, it's better to take some time, have a very well thought out follow-up, very long in the form of an email, get a lot of answers that were brought up in a formal meeting and present them very formally as a follow-up response. Whereas in the Silicon Valley, having more immediate follow-up and shorter communications, more brief follow-ups, showing that you're still getting the answer to something, not waiting until you have the answer for something. That's a little bit more natural. And then networking and connecting is just different compared to a lot of other areas. And then also some cultures, it's not as natural to share the progress that you've made, or in the Silicon Valley, we call it traction. It's not as normal to do that. But in the Silicon Valley, people are much more open about the progress they've made, much more open about the credibility they have as to why they're focused on the problem that they're focused on, why their company has a product or service that is in a specific area. Also, there's, just in going into new markets, there's a lot of things related to regulations, legal requirements. If we're looking at a lot of things related to COVID and the vaccine, different countries have different rules in terms of vaccines, in terms of treatments that you have to make sure that you get a better understanding for. And then there's almost this recalibration, as I was mentioning, that you do on your operating model and your business model. Your pricing may need to change. Who your target customer is might need to change. Your channels of distribution might need to change. The types of marketing strategies might need to change. All of those things need to be reevaluated as you're looking at it in the context of this new market. And then, of course, if you enter a new market, your competitors aren't just going to welcome you and say, "Yeah, come on in, take some of our market share," right? They're going to be responding to your entering the market, and so you have to be aware of understanding the dynamics of that market and positioning yourself and your value proposition to properly combat potential reactions from the competition. Then the next step is step 2, the ignite step. And so through this step, you're actually starting to take more action and preparing and entering a new market. And so what we use is what we call our 10X global market validation framework. And for those who have ever seen the business model canvas or lean canvas, you'll see some similarities within this. So sort of that top part are some of the core elements of what you would look at in your business model canvas or lean canvas, and looking at how you would need to change them in the new market, revisiting how you currently do things, not assuming it's going to be exactly the same in the new market, and asking the question of whether that's the right solution to enter the new market, whether that be the United States or another country, and then adapting accordingly. And then the bottom part of this framework, things like your HR and local presence, human resources and local presence, governments and regulations, regulatory considerations, any local partnerships that you might be able to foster to help accelerate you entering and scaling within a market. And then some of the cultural and translation things that we spoke about a moment ago. Those are foundational to this process as well. You need to evaluate those, understand them, and then create a plan for how you're going to combat those different things. So, some of those first steps are going in and like I was saying, essentially reevaluating through this framework your previous model and then adapting it accordingly. Making dollars and cents, it's a cute way of talking about just currency exchange and other considerations, taxation and things that might differ in that new market that you're entering, and just thinking through transfer pricing and all of those considerations. Part 4 of this second step is virtual testing. So, when you go back to this global framework, determining whether your target customer is the same, your revenue model, etc., there's different virtual testing you can do. Again, because so much of things now is virtual, it's a lot easier to do this testing because people are turning to digital and more online mechanisms in order to get their information, in order to do online shopping, whatever your product or service might be. People are going online instead of to a physical environment. And so it's easier for you to test and ultimately reach these potential customers. And then, as we were talking about, partners can be a really good tool to enter a market. You obviously need to have the right model with them, so you're capturing as much value and profit as possible. But they can help you understand a local market better. They may have a lot of existing relationships. They may have channels of distribution that you would have to develop on your own over time that you can access more immediately. Having a partner can often reduce the risk, can mitigate the risk a bit of entering a new market. And then finally, translating your company culture. So, in the Silicon Valley, we believe company culture is extremely important. When talking about company culture in my business school classes that I teach, I'll use examples of companies like Lyft versus Uber. And when you look at just those two companies in the same industry and their core values, those core values played out. The way that the company grew and some of their activities and the types of employees they attracted very closely matched those values. And while you saw incredible growth within Uber, you saw a very toxic culture around toxic masculinity, around to a certain extent gray area of breaking laws and doing things at the very least that were not morally sound. And that fit very well with the core values when you look at it. So translating your culture and what's important and core to your values in your home country into a new country can be very difficult. One, because of cultural differences in that market, but also just being able to do that remotely, whether you're bringing employees from your home market or hiring new employees in that new market, or a combination of both. And then finally, the third step is the expand step. So once you have gone through and done all the groundwork, then you have gone and done testing, validated that these are changes you need to make to your business and operating model, and created the right structure and process. Then it's all about scaling that initial positive feedback you've got. Now, one of the things that we're big on, and you see a lot, and this is really something that applies to startups, but also to large companies that are going into new markets, is realizing that you can't necessarily just plan everything out perfectly, implement that plan, and expect it to go perfectly, because often it doesn't. You have to, what we call in the Silicon Valley, pivot, kind of a fancy way of saying changing. And I'm not going to go through the whole list here on the page, but there are a number of different things you could pivot in order to better fit market opportunities. And so everything from changing a customer need pivot would be the same customer target, but maybe solving a different problem or offering a little bit of a different value proposition, to a value capture pivot, which would be changing your pricing or your revenue or monetization model. There are a number of different ones. And you see companies, to that point I was making before, it's better to challenge your own model than to let someone else to challenge it for you. Being more proactive about it is all the better. And it's a funny story around a very well-known company as of recent that has shown some major pivoting. For the longest time in our talks at 10X, we use Kodak, the photo and film company, as an example of a company that didn't disrupt themselves, that actually had the intellectual property for digital photography, but thought it would take away from their core business of film and printing pictures. And so they never did anything with it, and captured almost none of that market that basically took them from a Fortune 500 company to one much smaller than they used to be. But the funny thing about it is, in recent weeks, they announced how they are completely pivoting their business to actually address COVID treatment and other things that you would think were outside of their core of photography and other digital things, but really with some of their core intellectual property and expertise can be able to help with this pandemic. So they all of a sudden went from being a bad example of not pivoting to being a good example of pivoting. But I again won't go through all of these, but some of these course corrections need to happen in order to be successful in a new market. Then it's about reaching your end customer, developing and expanding those new marketing channels, those distribution channels, whether those be virtual, mainly in this case in the times of the pandemic, or something that is face-to-face as you grow brick and mortar in a new market. Another big challenge in this expand step is actually managing from afar. As we talked about, the importance of culture is crucial to being able to keep that continuity from your home market to the market you're entering. And so setting up the right structures to empower those people in the home market, but also stick to the culture and plans and other core values that you have in your home market can be a challenge. And then shifting your model as you go. And then ultimately, there's just things you need to work out and watch out for that can be bad, of examples of things that have come into new markets that if you're not sensitive to some of those changes as you expand can lead to some core problems. So, again, just to step back, those three main steps to take advantage of some of these opportunities that COVID has allowed us, and given that everybody is digital and virtual, it allows us to, in a more easy way, be able to enter new markets, build employee bases in new markets, access customers in new markets because everything is virtual. So step one, prepare, do those evaluations, prepare your organization and get buy-in. Step two, validate some recalibrations of your operating model and or your revenue model in order to fit this this new market. And then ultimately, as you are going, expand, pivot, make those changes, and ultimately make sure that your new setup in the new country, whether that be your employees in that new market, as well as your distribution in that new market, are able to be ready to scale and succeed. So all of these messages, if you're interested in learning more about it, we at 10X are developing a book around this. You can go to 10xinnovationlab.com/10x-book, and you can be put on the wait list to be one of the first to receive it as soon as it's ready. But more than just that, we would love to keep this dialogue going with you. So if you have any questions for us or want to connect, Klaus at 10xinnovationlab.com for Klaus, Aaron at 10X Innovation Lab for me. But we would love to keep a dialogue going and see ways that we can help you cope with this COVID pandemic. And if you think it's a great opportunity like we do to expand, as you want to expand different places, we're happy to give you resources and help support you in that.
Klaus and Aaron, thanks for your intervention. We hope to see you soon. And now is launch time in Softic 2020. Para las personas que nos están acompañando desde diferentes lugares, les queremos agradecer por llegar hasta esta primer parte de la agenda. Y les queremos recordar que nos vemos a las 2 de la tarde. Como ya les dijimos a nuestros invitados internacionales, es hora del almuerzo. 2 de la tarde, súper puntuales, en www.softic.com.co, donde creemos que efectivamente la clave es el software.
Somos el sector de software y TI de Colombia. Más de 1,000 empresas que generan productos y tecnología de vanguardia a la altura de los desarrollos más avanzados del mundo. Damos empleo de calidad a más de 120,000 personas que dedican su corazón y talento para que nuestra industria supere fronteras y sea reconocida por su alta calidad en más de 25 países, en 3 continentes. Creemos en nuestro país. Por eso, en estos momentos difíciles, seguimos trabajando sin descanso para brindar las soluciones tecnológicas que soportan la operación y conectividad de millones de personas, miles de empresas y cientos de instituciones y entidades de gobierno. Sabemos que con innovación y tecnología podremos superar cada reto y por eso, hoy más que nunca, estamos seguros que para vencer cualquier adversidad y reactivar nuestra economía, la clave la tienes tú, Colombia. La clave es el software nacional.